All right, so I have played Elden Ring. This may shock some of you, but I do have a gaming PC and I am able to play Elden Ring. I have always been able to play Elden Ring. I just chose not to. So, looking at my 2.5 hours of playtime, I'm already disappointed, right? This game does not live up to the hype, to the expectations, to anything, really. Like, there really is no reason to play this at all unless you want to see like all of the boss designs. Like to me, like it's really apparent the open world is empty. The characters aren't interesting. The concepts are ripped off from Dark Souls. Like it's not even that good looking. I found myself really surprised, playing this game and like looking at the visuals and realizing that like wow, Dark Souls, the original, looked better than this. It had like more creative locations. It had like better level design. It had better pacing. Like Elden Ring is just a complete mess. Like it is everything wrong with open world game design. There is no reason for Elden Ring to be open world. It benefits absolutely nothing from that game design structure, right? All it does is just pad out the experience to ludicrous degrees that were much more condensed in older games, right? What did we get in like last decade, right? We got Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne at one point. What again, like they all had like really tight condensed areas that were unique, had good interesting concepts, were able to keep the atmosphere fresh, right? They had a lot of variety. They were very unique for what they were, right? And then Elden Ring just does the exact same thing but worse, right? Like again, there is nothing that Elden Ring does better than Dark Souls, is my honest opinion. Like the main thing I thought was better than when that was Dark Souls, it was that like yeah, it was less clunky and it the mechanics were more fleshed out and interesting, right? You can actually use your bow in Elden Ring. You can actually do things like that. Like I felt like that was a little bit more streamlined and easy to understand, and like it didn't feel as convoluted as Dark Souls did. But maybe that's because I'm like used to Dark Souls. I've beaten it twice, but like looking at Elden Ring, playing Elden Ring, going through the mechanics, beating a couple of bosses. Yeah, there's nothing all that impressive with what they did here. And I find myself, as someone who actually played Zelda, unlike the rest of you plebs who like declare FromSlop to be better than Nintendo in every way, I've actually played Zelda. I actually played Tears of the Kingdom. I actually played Breath of the Wild. Tears of the Kingdom was better than this, right? Breath of the Wild was better than this, right? You can see that simply by the opening segments, right? The introductory like tutorial stage, right? What do both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom do? They set you on this like isolated piece of land that introduce you to all the unique mechanics. You are introduced to combat, you're introduced to like the environmental puzzles, you're introduced to concepts like ultra hand and climbing. The mechanics are really fleshed out and interesting. They demonstrate to you right out off the bat what Zelda gains by going open world, right? When you compare that with Elden Ring, which is the same thing as Dark Souls, but open world with no innovation or change at all to the formula, like you see, like right off the bat, why FromSlop is a mere imitator of what Nintendo is doing. And I do think that like really needs to be understood. Like playing Elden Ring, you can see the influences of Breath of the Wild. You can see that Miyazaki was like crying himself to sleep over every night. Like, oh, I'll never make anything as good in the Breath of the Wild. And yeah, he won't. Like he doesn't have the talent, he doesn't have the skill. He is a one-trick pony, right? Like, and I do think it's time that people understand this. That the difference in quality between FromSlop and Nintendo is just insane. It's not just about Zelda. It's like all their other franchises. Metroid, Mario, Pokemon, like the works. Like I can't think of any mainstream Nintendo franchise that's like worse than Elden Ring. Like there's not a single thing that I would like rather play Elden Ring over. Like it's just it's a disappointment. It's just unbelievable. Now I'm not shocked by this at all, like at all. I went into this like expecting to hate it. I understood that like this game was underwhelming, that it didn't live up to expectations. Like it was the game that YouTubers use to give themselves credibility. Like, oh, I'm a hardcore gamer. I play Dark Souls. Well, okay, what else do you play though? But I play Dark Souls. It's the hardest thing there is. Well, okay, but do you play Monster Hunter? Do you play Yeast? Do you play Zelda? Do you play anything else? Like, what are you comparing Dark Souls to? I'm comparing it to Destiny and Call of Duty. Like, yeah, okay, it's harder than those games. It's better than those games, but that is not at all like that is not at all impressive, right? It's like with the Doom thing all over again. Yeah, yeah. Doom 2016 is the best third-party game to come out in the entire decade of like 2010 to 2020, right? It is the best non-Nintendo title to come out during that time period. You know, Obviously, that's true. But the reason that is because everything else was so terrible. It's compared to Dark Souls, it's compared to The Last of Us, BioShock Infinite, Mass Effect 3. What came out that decade that was any good at all? Like Elden Ring is in the same boat, right? The fact that so many people like cling on to Elden Ring as like some savior of gaming, it's a joke. It really is. Like, and I am not surprised at all that like people have stopped talking about the game now. Now that the DLC is out, like, again, I do honestly like. It really feels like people were only clinging on to this game because of the life cycle of the product hadn't ended. Like the only reason people were still talking about Elden Ring, throughout 2023 and 2024, like, oh, Shadow of the Erd Tree is gonna be fantastic. It's gonna be a stellar expansion. Now it's out and nobody talks about it. Nobody remembers it. Like everyone's complaining about the lore and just like the inability of the developers to come up with anything interesting or fresh or exciting. People tried doing that thing they always do. Like, oh, people only hate Shadows of the Erd Tree because it's hard. They're Elden Ring fans, okay? Like, again, like, do you really think people are going to, like, 100% Elden Ring, do everything in it, and then, like, buy the DLC, and then, like, oh, it's too hard? Like, nobody is doing that. Again, it's just a cope. And this is the thing about Elden Ring in general. Like, this is the thing about FromSoftware in general. And this is the thing I had an issue with. The thing, like, I was accused of being, right? Everybody always tells you that if you don't like FromSlop, you're simply filtered by the difficulty, right? You can't make any progress in the game, you can't beat it, you've been filtered, and that's why you don't like it. But in reality, there are plenty of like real practical reasons to not like Elden Ring, right? It's not that you got filtered, it's not that it's too hard, it's that it's just not very good to begin with. I have much more respect for Bayonetta, for Ninja Gaiden Black, for Monster Hunter, for like Yeast, right? Zelda. Like again, like whether or not these games are more difficult than Elden Ring is irrelevant because all of them, every single one of those games I just listed, are better than this, right? Like FromSlop really is nothing special, and like playing their 10 out of 10 masterpiece, on stream and like experiencing that for myself. Yeah, I was completely 100% right about this title. I called it that this game was only hyped up by like absolute plebs. I knew that it wasn't any good, that it made no significant improvements to the FromSlop formula, that it's not something like really relevant or important to talk about at all. Like again, this game trails so far behind the Legend of Zelda franchise that it's really not even funny, right? Like I think when we get like the next Zelda game, when we get like the brand new setting, when we get like new mechanics, when we see like the radical evolution from Tears of the Kingdom, like I think that's just going to drive the point home even more. Like to me, and I think this is becoming more obvious, the people who like actively hate Tears of the Kingdom and like condemn it all the time and attack it, like they never played the game. Like anybody who says Tears of the Kingdom is identical to Breath of the Wild has no idea what they're talking about, right? Anybody who comes out and tries to say that Tears of the Kingdom is a simple rehash of Breath of the Wild has no idea what they're talking about. Anybody who tries to say Tears of the Kingdom is not a great game is delusional, right? Like and doesn't know what he's talking about, right? This is the current situation is that like all of these Nintendo games that are better than Elden Ring mysteriously don't get talked about at all or get like severely downplayed. You know, Bayonetta 3 was better, No More Heroes 3 was better, Metroid Dread was better. Like how often did we see people come out and try to tell you, "Oh, those games are garbage. Oh, they're bad. They're terrible. They're not very good at all." They seriously tried like condemning all these games, right? You know, Breath of the Wild got it, Tears of the Kingdom got it, Link's Awakening got it, Echoes of Wisdom got it. Metroid Prime 4 is getting attacked right now. Like, but Elden Ring is worshipped. Oh, Elden Ring is the greatest thing since I don't know, like Final Fantasy VII. You know, like same energy behind it, right? Like same kind of same mindset is just like, oh, it's what did Ocarina of Time do? Oh, it introduced like 3D space to gaming. It introduced all these new novel concepts. Oh, it has this really great story, great combat system, great dungeons, great pacing. You know, it's one of the best games of all time. What does Final Fantasy VII have? It has a couple of waifus and the girl dies. Like, okay, like again, Final Fantasy VII is like objectively a great game, right? But it did not innovate to the same level and that Ocarina of Time did. And that, in hindsight, that's really obvious. Like considering how Ocarina of Time is still considered like one of the greatest of all time, and Final Fantasy VII fell off a long time ago. But like when you like at the time, throughout the 2000s, like Final Fantasy VII was considered neck and neck with Ocarina of Time, and it was the same kind of logic, right? That like, oh, it's mature games for mature gamers. Like, well, okay, but what about all the other games that like took what Final Fantasy VII did and improved on it? Like, what about the older Final Fantasy games that are better than Seven in a lot of ways? You know, Seven is a legit good game. I enjoyed a lot, but to put it on a pedestal of being like the greatest of all time is and always has been, I think, completely disrespectful as to like the real innovators in the gaming space. You know, Squaresoft would have been much better off if they had developed the game on N64 to begin with, right? Where they could have actually like incorporated real 3D visuals, and maybe then they would have been like, been able to compete with Nintendo. But no, they shafted all of that for extra disc space and cutscenes and like again really shallow features that appeal to like really that appeal to the plebs, that appeal to casual gamers, right? Elden Ring is the same way, I think. I think a lot of these kind of games like kind of sell themselves on this idea that in order to be a real gamer, in order to have status in the community, like you have to play like Doom, you have to play Elden Ring. Oh, don't you dare play Nintendo. That's for kids. Like you have to play the mature games for mature gamers. That's Elden Ring, right? Like it has no benefit to it. There's nothing great about this game. There's nothing remarkable about it. It's not special. It's not interesting. It's not fun. It's not particularly well made. The monster designs aren't good. Like it's it's a mediocre product that is consumed by people that do not have a sophisticated enough palette for for video games, essentially. Like, FromStop is good because everyone says it's good in the minds of like the general public. That is my assessment of this, is that this game was a complete joke.